Hi, folks. Welcome again to another edition of this wonderfully esoteric, shambolic, wonderful thing that is the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour, APCH. Sarah's just been describing how she's huddled next to a radiator. It is extremely cold here in the UK at the moment, so we are all huddled as best we can and dealing with sub-zero temperatures. I'm delighted today to have the opportunity to chat with somebody I've known of for many, many years, and indeed have discussed on many, many times, and I've been a guest on his show, the wonderful Dr. Michael Vasey. Now, Michael is somebody that I've known by reputation through a joint link that we have with an organization called the Servants of the Light, which we will touch upon during our discussions. Because I think there's some very interesting areas that we can discuss here. But just to tell you a little bit about Dr. Vasey, he's a collector of paranormal stories and a magician. He writes paranormal books that will keep you awake at night, poetry that will make you question reality, and books on practical magic and shamanism. He grew up experiencing ghosts and poltergeists, studied and taught magic with a real school of hermetic sciences, and these days can be found in search of the goddess in the forests and mountains of the Czech Republic. He hosts his own podcast called The Magical World of Michael Vasey that looks at reality, magic, and myth. Now, Gary has sent me a few of his books over the years, and I have to say that I agree with him totally about if you read his books, they will keep you awake at night. Because believe me, his book on black-eyed children, I think, was extraordinary. But it was extraordinary not only in the way he describes the incidents, but also the way in which he analyzes them as well. And it's self-evident that Gary is an extremely deep thinker and exactly the kind of guest that we want here on the Consciousness Hour. So Gary, without further ado, welcome to Consciousness Hour.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, wonderful to have you involved. Sarah, by the way, can you just check, are we actually on speaker view as well? So that is working.
Yeah, we are.
Wonderful. Okay, because I can't see the speaker view here. Very, very quickly.
We're not on speaker view. We're on the other one where you can see all of us.
All right. Okay. Let's see if I can then put that on to speaker view. Yeah, that's better because it seems to work far better if we do it that way. Okay. Thanks again. So, Gary, can you just take an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself? Because you're a little bit of a man of mystery, even for me, actually. So if you can tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in where you are now, really, I suppose.
Yeah, well, it's a long story, but I'm from Hull, Yorkshire. I grew up the eldest of three boys in a very average sort of working class family. I was very fortunate to catch that window of opportunity where you got to go to college for free. And I did a degree in geology, and I followed that up with a PhD in geology as well. That's University of Aston and then the University of Strathclyde. And I started my travel back then because I chose my PhD deliberately because it involved transatlantic travel. It involved fieldwork in Nova Scotia, Canada, and I got 3 field seasons of 6 weeks in, would you believe, which was awesome. And it also made me just want to live in the United States or Canada, North America, because I just really liked what I saw over there. And so I started my professional career with British Petroleum as a geologist, and soon got bored with geology as a profession. Jumped into information technology and found my way to Houston, Texas, as part of Capgemini. And I spent 20 years in Houston, which is where I was when we first met, which was a request by your publisher to review I think it was your first book, Life After Death. And that's when we first met. And of course, as sometimes happens, I met a lady who was Czech and came over here in 2006. Unfortunately, that relationship's no longer in place, but I have a beautiful 13-year-old daughter, so I stay here, for my daughter. I have 3 grown boys in Houston and Austin, Texas, and that's it in a nutshell, really. I'm kind of a crazy sort of person because I just love to do all kinds of things. So all the stuff you mentioned, also make music. I'm on Spotify and all Amazon and everything else, and I guess some people probably think I'm a bit nuts, but you want to life is for living, right? So let's live.
Absolutely, because I was interested there that you worked for Capgemini. Was that the old computer company, CAP?
Yeah, Capgemini Sogeti. And actually, I worked for Hoskins, and they were acquired by Capgemini, and they set up an oil and gas group in Houston.
Wow.
Ran by a Dutch guy, and they wanted it to be an international team, and I was head of exploration and production, upstream services globally. In terms of marketing and business development, not direct, it's kind of a ghost organization. From there, I went to Sybase, the database company. It was same sort of role, but energy and utilities. And then I joined one of their customers, which was a small software vendor, as VP marketing. And now I'm an analyst, co-own my own business with a colleague in Houston. And we perform analyst services for buyers, investors, and vendors in and around the commodity trading risk management world, which is a long way from what we're going to talk about today. And that's where some of the name confusion comes, because I always wanted to be, my occult supernatural persona to be different from my professional one. So I went with G. Michael Vasey, right, for the supernatural stuff, and just Gary M. Vasey for the professional stuff.
Ah.
But of course, Google's quite clever, and anybody can figure out that the two people are in fact the same. But I've stuck with the G. Michael Vasey because I do think it gives me a bit of a different persona.
Yeah, because one of the things, and we're in grave danger here of going off, because my normal career is a management consultant. So therefore, we suddenly, there's a lot of things you said. I thought, that's interesting. I really want to pursue that, because I had associates who worked at CAP when they first started up. Yeah. In fact, an ex-girlfriend of mine worked there for many, many years. But I won't do that. So what I will ask you then is, how on earth a geologist, and I can't think of any more grounded, literally and metaphorically, than a rock scientist. Well, maybe a rock scientist where you're into rock music, but how on earth did you manage to develop an interest and an involvement in esoteric and parapsychology?
It was always there. I mean, when I was a little boy, I remember sitting vividly in a little house with a front room and a little back room, sitting in the doorway between the two rooms, because my mother would be cooking in the kitchen. And I imagine this is preschool, for 4 years of age, and sort of asking those questions. Well, why am I here? And who am I? And what am I? And what? And I had this sudden idea that actually I wasn't there at all, that I was down this corridor with all these little booths. And in every booth, somebody was hooked up to a computer, and they were living a virtual life through this computer. And so I saw myself living a virtual life hooked up to this machine. And of course, I don't think virtual reality was a thing back in.
Can I just review on that? So you're really young, and you said you have this image, or you see yourself.
I saw myself hooked up to this machine in a room, living my life like a holiday. I paid for it. And this life, to me, at the time, was like a virtual reality. We'd call it virtual reality now. Back then, I didn't really have words for it, just like a dream that I was living. But that when I die, I'll go back to the person sitting in the booth.
Your daemon, as I recall.
I saw this really long corridor with all these booths and all these people sitting. And I got, when you think, even now, when you think about questions like that, infinite questions, your mind just explodes. And so I started thinking about this stuff at a very early age, and then strange things started to happen. So, for example, around the same time, I went to bed, I was put to bed, and I had a little bedroom. I guess there was a wardrobe with a mirror and a window into the backyard. And apparently, I screamed the place down, and there were two bangs, like a gun or something. My mum and dad came running up the stairs, and I told them that a little blue man had jumped out of the mirror, shot me twice with a blank gun, and then jumped through the window and into the backyard. And my mum and dad would have put it down to a nightmare or just a little kid, except they heard the gunshots.
Wow.
So from there, strange things happened to me with regular occasion. And by the time I was probably 12 or 13, I'd gone through all the fantasy stuff, Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and all of the usual stuff. And I was reading books about occult magic, spiritualism, Madame Blavatsky, all this kind of stuff. And of course, it backfired a bit because everybody at school thought I was really weird. And this kind of, I didn't do myself any favors because we had religious education one day a week for an hour. And they said, would anybody like to take a lesson? I said, yeah, I will. And so you can imagine I got up there and I'm on the blackboard and I'm talking about the spiritual plane and the consciousness. And I thought I was doing a great job. And everybody just avoided me from that point forward. So I was quite pleased to go to college because I could start all over again.
Extraordinary. So how, there's already millions of questions I have on this. So what do you think gave you that kind of special glimpse of what I would call, because in my model of Damon and the Eidolon, I argue that our Damon is the person you saw on the computer or watching your computer screen, and you're an Eidolon. So what is it that made you at a very young age have a vision of that? What do you think? Have you ever found out why you think that was?
I have no idea, except that I think that, you see, I also, we spent some time way back when you were writing the Time book, and I read, I was one of the first buyers of that book, I think. And I've always had, through meditation and also just through imagination, the idea that really my life is a record. My consciousness is the stylus.
Yes.
I kind of suspect that these things have been put deliberately in my life to put me, to keep me on a, I guess it's preordained anyway, if you look at it that way. But I just think that this is what I planned for myself. It's about exploring my unconscious mind and the universe. Reality.
Yeah, because funnily enough, our guest tomorrow on the Incon is a young lady called Rebecca Sharrock who remembers every incident in her life. And of course, the argument there is she's just accessing effectively the demonic side of her consciousness. She's been able to access directly the person that you metaphorically see in front of the computer screen. And, this is quite fantastic to discuss this because, there we have you as a classic example of proof of my overall hypothesis really here, which is wonderful.
Well, I think another one that I think we may even have discussed, you've probably forgotten, but going back to the Nova Scotia field seasons, the first year that I was there, I'd just learned to drive. I got my driver's license just before I went. It was a precondition of getting the money for the study was that I had a driving license. I failed the first test and passed immediately with about 3 days grace. And when I got there, I had to rent a vehicle because it's Nova Scotia, it's massive and nobody there. And I have to get to very remote places and get my hammer out and tap on the rocks. And so I got this Mustang GT, 5-litre Mustang GT in red. I mean, I couldn't believe my luck that they would give me this, And I'm racing around like a boy racer, as you would. And I'm going down this track, just like a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. And I'm probably doing 50, 60 miles an hour, watching the dust in the back mirror, red dust. And then all of a sudden, I hear a voice from the back seat say, "Gary, stop." And I turn around, I'm like, what the hell? There's nobody there. And then, "Gary, stop." So I brake, I almost lost the car braking. And I came to a stop and I'm like, what the hell? Who said that? I'm in the middle of nowhere. There's nobody in the vehicle but me. And I get out the car because my heart's going like this, not just from the voice in the back, but from the skid that I went into. And I realized there was a hairpin bend and a 100-meter drop. If I'd carried on going, I would never have made it. And that's exactly what you're talking about, right?
Wow, absolutely. That's it.
And all the other stuff I've said is all in my book, Inner Journeys, Explorations of the Soul, which came out in 2005.
Right.
So, you can validate it. It's
incredible, because I hear so many stories from people around the world that send me similar examples, and of course it's already frustrating, isn't it, for us, because people will turn around and say the plural of anecdote is not evidence, but effectively how many times have these things got to be reported for people to suddenly, and scientists or researchers just say, no, there is a phenomenon here. It's common and it's regular, and we need to really be looking at it. Now, so moving on then. So you did all this, and you go off to university. Did you continue with your interest then in terms of matters esoteric, or did you move on to something else, or how did you then progress?
It's always been an interest, and there were always things happening. But 18, 19, 20, I was really scared of this stuff. I couldn't sleep without the light on, and slept under the covers and all.
What triggered the fear? What triggered the fear then?
Well, the fear was seeing the skeletal priest and various apparitions that were not particularly pleasant, and also the fact that we had poltergeist in the house.
Was this at your home, or was this
where
you were living?
In my home?
Right.
So footsteps and sighs and groans and doors opening, keys disappearing, money disappearing and showing up in the bathroom sink. All kinds of strange things. I just was frightened. I mean, I was frightened. I was a fearful kid. I was a fearful teenager and fearful in my 20s.
Not surprising.
And so you try to push it to one side, but it keeps coming back and it won't let you forget. But you get wrapped up in a career. I wanted to have a career, and then I met who was, the lady who became my wife. I had 3 boys, went to the US, but every now and then I would start reading again. I joined the Rosicrucian Amorc and did a bit of that, and then realized it really wasn't for me. But I met a few people in the process of doing that who pointed me in the direction of a school called the Servants of the Light, based in Guernsey. By this time I was in Texas, and I was probably in my early 40s. And I thought, now is the time. My kids are all teenagers. Now is the time, and I'm in my own business, right? So I'm my own boss. Now is the time I'm going to do this. So I signed up and I did the first degree course by correspondence, had a wonderful supervisor, a lady in the UK, and I started the course, which was basically, I think it was 55-year course, so 48.
Can you just very quickly for the listeners explain, because I know of the Servant of the Light and I've spoken at their events a couple of times, but could you just give a little bit of background information about the SOL, just in general terms? Because I'm right in saying, isn't there a pedigree link going back to Israel Regardie and also to the lady that was based in Rose-on-Sea in North Wales, Dion Fortune? Am I right in thinking that it comes through there?
I suppose there is. My interest was that it was started by Ernst Butler, and he had some form of relationship with various individuals and schools at the time. But I had read a couple of books by Ernst Butler, and I was very impressed. It was a very spiritual, clean, Christian sort of perspective. And it seemed to me to be everything that I was looking for, and it didn't have any of the dark elements that sometimes you saw with a Crowley-esque school or something like that. And I didn't want any part of that. So it was a good place to start. And I'd not met Dolores and didn't even really know her, because I'm in Houston. And, I'm just doing correspondence, and my supervisor, Elizabeth Fox, was just guiding me through the course. And we got,
just to explain to everybody, Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki is the
director of studies and the lead person. And she's written a hell of a lot of books, and I can recommend the vast majority of them as excellent reading. And she's a wonderful, wonderful character and a wonderful human being. I mean, if you meet Dolores, you never forget Dolores.
You don't, do you? Absolutely. She is probably one of the in pure terms, one of the biggest personalitied human being I think I've ever met. She just exudes kindness and joy. She's so humorous. She has such a sense of humor.
Actually, I mean, she tells some really bawdy stories. Awesome. And so where was I? So anyway, about halfway through this correspondence course, you cover things like, meditation, Kabbalah, and I can't get too much into the course. Can't give away too much because it's not right. But I found my own inner contact, and I named this contact, called itself Astaroth, right? And it took me a few months to figure out what was going on.
So how did Astaroth manifest the first time
It's really weird because I was meditating and trying to, I was doing the exercise, and the exercise involved a castle and an Arthurian theme and swords and all this kind of stuff. And in my meditation, it suddenly became very visual. I could see it. And there was like something told me to slash my sword on the wall. So I did, and a tunnel opened up. So I started walking down the tunnel, and I slashed my sword somewhere else, and I came out on a mountainside. And on the mountainside, like Tibet or somewhere, very spectacular mountains, on the mountainside was a figure. I thought it was a man, covered in bandages or cloth or something, sitting huddled on the hillside. So I said, "Who are you?" And the voice in my head just said, "Astaroth." I mean, that's how it happened. And gradually, as I worked with this thing, it turned into a woman. It was a woman, and it was a female contact, and she became a younger woman during the course of the next, ever since. And, I think it's a part, we could argue all night and discuss all night what Astaroth is, but I actually think it's a part of myself. It's a part of my, and it has access to my unconscious mind and the collective unconscious or Akashic records or whatever, and guides me. I mean, you have your own idea as to what it is, and I wouldn't disagree. We're just using different terms.
Because again, fascinating here. There's so many links here, in the sense that a previous guest on this show is Myron Dial, and I don't know if you've seen the interview I've done a few interviews with Myron Dial over the years, and Myron experiences temporal lobe epilepsy, and his equivalent of your Astaroth is a being called Charon. And again, Charon initially presented itself to him in as a location not dissimilar to yours, but a place he called Zelkon. And then the entity, as time goes on, the entity changes sex and becomes female. And his Charon has become female. Now, I've always argued that depending upon your sexuality and everything, if you're heterosexual, your daemon will be the opposite sex to you.
And anima, in my case, anima.
Correct.
Female,
correct. And I've always argued my own guiding daemon. I always call her she, because she guides me sometimes. So this is intriguing. So it's Astaroth, and again, just as I'm making another point, there is another writer friend of mine that's been on this show and has interviewed me on here, who is a writer. And he writes stories about mythical stories, sort of science fantasy. And one of the characters, which very much manifests almost like a daemon within his novels, sounds so similar to yours, because he describes in his novels, the rags. And he actually, in the book, he says that it was this kind of animated rags that were around.
To me, I thought I was meeting an Egyptian mummy, that it was that kind of a figure, and very thin and huddled, and hiding its face. And it took me a couple of goes to get the name Astaroth. And of course, then I Googled it. This would be about 2004. And I Googled it and came up with Astaroth, the goddess, or and the one that, is supposed to be a demonic thing. And so that kind of scared me, because I'm scared about this stuff. But over time, there was nothing about this Astaroth that was at all negative or demonic. In fact, it was very helpful, and started to instruct me. So I was getting my lessons from the SOL and guidance from my supervisor, but also guidance from this Astaroth.
And did Astaroth come into you in kind of hypnagogic states or altered states of consciousness?
Yes. Yeah, in meditation, mind awake, body asleep. Yeah, and always that way. And I realized later that with a school like this one, the course is set up for you to meet your guide, yes, in a sense. So this was considered, I guess, to be a sign that, something was happening. And so I was invited to take my first degree initiation, and I flew over to UK, and I went to a weekend retreat, and got my first degree initiation along with a bunch of other people. Subsequently, I was honored to get a second degree initiation and become a supervisor for the school. So I supervise students on my own. And that's an interesting experience as well. Basically looking over somebody else's shoulder and seeing their experience. And between that and doing my own podcast and talking to a lot of people, there are really common themes in this stuff. It starts early. It's an interest as a young boy or girl.
Yeah.
It's always early. And you just kind of can't escape from it. And it drags you. It finally drags you kicking and screaming in a certain direction. And I've got a lot of received content from Astaroth. I mean, the book, The Mystical Hexagram, that I wrote with Sue Vincent, is basically received material from Astaroth, in which she explains to me that the hexagram is a symbol that unlocks a lot more value from other systems like Kabbalah, even astrology, etc. And the whole book, my father, God rest his soul, he read my manuscript and he said it sounded like some kind of 18th century occult text because it just flowed off my pen. I was yeah. And anyway, so I left the SOL about 3 or 4 years ago because just various things happened in terms of succession, and there was a sort of hiatus because of that succession. And during that hiatus, there was things that I wanted to do that the school felt it couldn't support me in doing. And some of my colleagues and friends had gone off in a different direction already anyway and started the Silent Eye. So I followed them and joined the Silent Eye. And the Silent Eye is another school, and I can highly recommend both the SOL and the Silent Eye, both good. But with the Silent Eye, I started the course, but I never really progressed past about month 6 or 7 because I really felt like I wanted to go out on my own and didn't need to be going through somebody else's material anymore. That's not to say that I've got nothing to learn. I've got everything to learn, but I just wanted to, I decided I wanted to go off in my own direction. And so the Silent Eye, when they could, would organize quarterly weekend workshops. So I went on a couple of those and would continue to go on them, except obviously we can't at the moment. So that's a bit of a shame. But they hold workshops where they get into the land, particularly in the UK, and they have a theme for the weekend, a magical theme, a meditational theme, and they also visit particular places. And it's really good. I mean, it's full of synchronicity. Every weekend for me was full of synchronicities, yes. And I wasn't really sure what direction I wanted to go in, but I knew I wanted to do something on my own. And because my relationship had finished here and I was just here for my daughter, and because I really don't need to speak Czech and therefore hadn't learned, because all my business colleagues and friends all are, English, American, South African, whatever, I really did not feel very at home in the Czech Republic at all. I mean, beautiful country, nice food, good beer, all that kind of stuff. But every time I went back to England, I felt that sense of I belong. But then I don't, because I haven't lived here for 30 years and it's a foreign country. But it's that sense of spiritual belonging, of the geology on the ground, matches my expectations, right? And I went to see Sue and one of the other people that run the Silent Eye, Stuart, for a weekend. Sue I'd known for a long time, a friend of mine who I wrote the book with, The Mystical Hexagram. And I showed up and the pair of them thought I was seriously ill because I looked so bad. And I had a hell of a job getting there. Planes late, tubes cancelled, trains cancelled. It was like fighting to get to this weekend. And we went on a magical mystery tour following a book that they'd written called The Initiate, which was about following the birds to churches and places of spirituality and having synchronicities and magic happen. So we followed this track, and the whole weekend was just synchronicity after synchronicity after synchronicity. And on the way back on the final evening to Sue's place, she said, it's running a bit late. Rather than go to the shops and pick up something for dinner, let's just pick a restaurant on the side of the road and stop. So purely at random, we pull into this restaurant, and I'm talking, and we're all talking about what a wonderful weekend it's been, how magical it's been, all these different strange coincidences and events. And I opened the menu. I couldn't believe my eyes because I was on the menu. Gary pizza. Gary chips. Well, what the hell is this? So it's like the final synchronicity. I was on the menu that weekend, yes? So get it right.
This is such a classic example, isn't it, how synchronicities work, and it makes you burst out laughing. You know, it's the kind of the whole Jungian Wolfgang Pauli joke, really, because some of the things you were just saying there, you know, I agree totally. You get into this from a very young age, you know, and you don't have a choice about it. It's as if you are, your analogy, you know, of the vinyl record, you end up in the groove and you can't move away from it. You might move away slightly, but you still have to follow that pattern. And I remember when I was invited to do a talk for the Servants of the Light up in Czechia many years ago. And I remember Dolores introducing me to the group. And I remember her saying, you know, this is the first guy that's actually done the science of what we know and have known for generations, you know, about this whole idea of the daemon and the eidolon and everything. And the one thing that I found extraordinary about the Servants of the Light was that, you know, I was chatting to people beforehand and afterwards, like yourself, wall-to-wall scientists, wall-to-wall people with PhD and post-PhD, postdoctoral qualifications, mostly in things like particularly IT, I thought, you know, and you would think, because all here, and we need to keep stressing this to people watching this program, this is Dr. Gary Vasey, who is a scientist, has got his PhD in a science subject. This is not some strange guy you've met down the pub. This guy does the science, you know, because all the time, don't they? They turn around and they say, oh, do the science. You know, you don't know what you're talking about because you're not a scientist. Yeah. And then there's people like you that self-evidently you are. Very quickly, Sarah, have you had anything you want to just come in here quickly? Because I always invite you in about this stage.
Yeah, well, I was interested in your thoughts, Gary, about joining an organisation and whether you think it's necessary or it's a journey that someone can do as an individual. Because I've had this experience of, obviously you can read a lot of books and you can do a lot of research on your own, but there's something to be said for being part of a group that's doing work and progressing. And I've been turned off a little bit by the kind of hierarchical structures of some of these organizations. Have you had experiences of that as well?
Well, I think all of these organizations to some extent can have a hierarchy, and they can develop into like a cult of the personality. And that is often an issue with magical schools. Aleister Crowley being the prime example. But, you know, if you are interested, you can read books, but what you lack as a solo practitioner is the group structure, the egregore of that school. And I think for a time, being under that group idea and working with others is extremely beneficial for you to grow and understand what it's really about. Because it's, one of the key things is discipline. Another key thing is use of imagination and realizing that, one of the things I liked about working with the book review was that in your book, you use a lot of quantum physics and things. And, I think that quantum physicists are just beginning to catch up with where occultists have been for 2 millennia.
Yeah.
And it's that kind, and also Jung on the psychological side. Obviously, some of the Jungian ideas are also, you see them as well. But I think being within a group is great. But I do think that potentially there comes a time when the group, you want to branch out on your own, and you've figured out the basics, you've learned the basics, you know how to protect yourself, you understand how this works to a reasonable degree. Never be arrogant about it, though, because it can be pretty dangerous working with the inner self and the forces that are out there. So always approach it in the right frame of mind. but for me, I just decided it was time to go it alone and do something that I wanted to. Well, was being driven to do by Astaroth, if you want, and also to fit with my personal life issues.
That was something I was going to ask, actually, because one of the things I found was that as you kind of go along your path, your needs are met by the new characters that you meet. And I think what you were saying about Astaroth coming along and then realizing that was the job of the group to allow you to have access, to give you the space to have access to this entity. I find that really interesting because I've had similar experiences where you kind of recognize the next stage is meeting a guardian, and then a guardian kind of magically manifests. So I find that interesting.
Yeah. And for me, it was all related to this discomfort in the Czech Republic. And that weekend with Sue and Stuart, I realized that what we were doing was connecting with the land. And Sue, in fact, I even asked, what can I do? And Sue said, connect with the land in the Czech Republic. You've been there 12 years. Weren't the Templars? Aren't there Celtic or some, So I came back, and sure enough, I found out there were 2 Templar locations within 50 kilometers of Brno. And also discovered that there was Celtic settlements here, but there was also Slavic. And so I started visiting all of these sites and doing my research. And of course, I began to connect with the land here. I could even feel myself kind of putting down roots. And then about this time last year, I was walking my dog. I just live under Brno Castle, beautiful place. And I was walking my dog, and I happened on a shaman engaged in some magical work. I didn't distract him or anything, but I tracked what he was doing. And as I tracked what he was doing, I think he became aware of me. We never did meet again. I wish we had, because I'd like to ask him a lot of questions. But it just seemed to drag me further into this Slavic thing. So what I've been doing here is I've been working with the Slavic gods and goddesses. And so my solo work has turned into working with the Slavic culture, the Slavic energies, learning about the Slavic culture, actually engaging in some of the pagan type activities, making my goddess of winter effigy, burning and drowning her in spring, and going through this process and trying to feel my way through this alien Slavic energy. Mm. And what I've discovered is, I'm mapping energy lines with, I was out this afternoon, they're still here, mapping energy lines across the city. I'm visiting all these places and discovering that statues of Virgin Mary with baby Jesus are nothing of the sort. The goddess with baby Perun, the god of thunder, Slavic god of thunder. And I've written that this is my project, Chasing the Shaman, Chasing Dragons in Moravia. And hopefully the next book will be Chasing the Goddess, because right now I'm working through the winter with the goddess of winter. And then on the spring equinox, I'll shift to Vesna, the goddess of spring, and sort of work my way through that. And talking about synchronicities, things like walking along and butterflies landing on me, blackbirds coming up and talking to me. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but these things really happen. Realizing the connection between dragons and earth energies, and then going to a site with a friend where we felt the earth energy, and then we're walking around the church, and off the back where the drainage comes, they've got 2 dragon heads on the drain directly over where the earth energy is.
They have a good respect there for water worship as well. I've been to Karlovy Vary a lot, which is one of my most favorite places. And I think that kind of reverence for drinking natural spring water is something that's been continually upheld in a lot of European countries, whereas we've kind of, unless it's somewhere like Bath, tend to have forgotten about it over here, which is a real shame, because I think that's a really powerful thing to do.
Well, this is I found, because when I was invited over, when I did the book launch for the Croatian language editions of 2 of my books, I spent a lot of time in Zagreb, and there was something quite extraordinary about the feeling, the kind of Slavic feel, and I can't. It's very difficult to define exactly what it is. And I guess probably the person in our little group probably is Eileen, who could probably really explain the whole Slavic feel and the Eastern European feel as well, because there is something drawing that there. And one of the questions I was then thinking to ask Gary was, when you use the term the goddesses, this is something again that Myron Dial uses as a term. What would you define the goddess? Is it a life force? What would you describe it as being as an esotericist?
It's an energy, and I associate it with the earth and with the moon. And it's I think if you go back to the original sort of spirituality amongst humans in the very earliest days, it was definitely more female spirituality and the grandmother and female shamans and so on. And we become a very patriarchal society, which, I have no issue with necessarily, but from a spiritual point of view, and especially as a man, I see a lot of value in developing a relationship with the energies that are feminine and the goddess. And I find it more difficult to engage with the feminine energies actually than the masculine energies, obviously. It's very difficult for me it's very easy for me to imagine being the god of thunder with bulky muscles and long hair and a sword. It's a bit different trying to be a woman, in your mind. It's an alien experience because I'm a man and I don't know what it feels like to be a woman. I can only imagine. But sort of working with those energies, I think, is very valuable. And I think there's a side of the male psyche that needs to be open to the feminine aspect within themselves and become a more balanced and whole person as a result. And maybe it's back to your ideas as well. The inside is female for a heterosexual male and maybe male for a heterosexual woman. So it's just that polarity and balancing that polarity. And what I've learned from, Astaroth and the mystical hexagram is that it's all about balance. It's all about finding the balance between two extremes. And I find that today, I'm very disappointed that Western culture is coming down to a sort of bipolar polarity, where it's so bad that if you make a statement, people judge you immediately as being one or the other, which for me is kind of strange because I'm neither one or the other. I try to find the balance in the middle, and sometimes I'm pulled a bit further this way or a bit further that way, depending on what it is I'm looking at, because it's all about the balance. It's about two negatives and one positive, and the positive can actually vary where it is. But it's like foolhardiness and cowardice are extremes of the same polarities of the same, what would you call it? Virtue, I guess. But foolhardiness is just as bad as cowardice. So where's the balance? The balance is bravery, right? It's in the middle. And so, when you look at something like politics or something like that, I always try to look at it in terms of, well, there's a balance. There's a balance here. There's a balance that I must try to find somewhere in between. So I try to look for the balance in everything now. That's one thing that I've learned from this.
I think this is one thing that's really happening at the moment, and we're all being drawn together. And immediately, after this discussion, I'm sure Sarah would agree totally here that, again, the way we are resonating with you is the way we resonate with our group, with the people that we know that we're working with now. And we all seem to be finding each other in some way, and all our daemons are working together collectively to create something that we genuinely believe is extraordinary. And I think my feeling is that you're very much part of this as well. Having known you for many, many years now, I just feel instinctively that, this is something you could really value add to the things we're trying to do, because you have this esoteric knowledge. and you also have the knowledge of the experiences you've been having, because this comes across in your books, and I'd like to move on now to that, because always an hour is never long enough with these, and we always find this, that we suddenly look at the clock and you go, oh my God, we've been already 3/4 of an hour. So would you like to tell us a little bit about your books and your writing and your poetry and everything else? And what would be really interesting was to tell us something, one or two of the most extraordinary things that in your research you've come across, that you've written about in your books, to send everybody off with a shiver, really, I suppose.
Okay, so obviously I'm interested in the paranormal because I'm interested in reality, and that's really where you and I have really common ground. And I really love your work and your books because it resonates with me big time. But reality is what interests me. So my poetry never sells, unfortunately. But I do put out poetry books. My poetry is all about it's flow of consciousness stuff, usually done after meditation when I'm still high in that sense, and it just streams out of me. And it's about reality. It's about my perceptions of reality, my perceptions of consciousness, my perceptions of nature and the goddess and all of that kind of stuff. And I really enjoy doing that. But the other thing that I enjoy is I had all of these experiences, and somebody said to me, well, why don't you write books about them? People would buy those books. So I wrote My Haunted Life, and to my utter amazement, it did quite well. And then I wrote My Haunted Life 2, and that was a #1 bestseller in the in the UK, on Amazon. And I was stunned. But by this time, I'd run out of personal stories, right? So I start talking to relatives and friends. So My Haunted Life 3 comes out, and that's their stories. And then I thought, well, look, I need to collect stories. So I set up a website called myhauntedlife2.com. And people bring their stories there, and I post them. And then occasionally I'll do compilations of those stories plus other stories as books. And usually those stories don't bother me that much. The typical shadow people, ghosts and ghoulies and things that go bang in the night. But one day this story came in, and it was about this black-eyed kid on the doorstep. And it just literally scared the shit out of me. And I thought, wow. So I published this story on the website, and then all of a sudden, floods of these stories start coming in. So I thought, well, what on earth is this about? So I started researching, and I found Brian Bethel was credited with sort of starting this black-eyed kid story idea, because he was in a car in Texas and black-eyed kids asked him for a ride, and he put it on an early bulletin board and it took off. And so on the internet, you'll read Black-Eyed Kids started with Brian Bethel. But what I found was that, no, Black-Eyed Kids have been around for time immemorial. The Indians in America had a black-eyed kid that basically came and stole their soul. Black eyes have been used to denote all kinds of things about possession and evil in Hollywood and all kinds of things. In the psychological literature, people, when they really lose their temper and really lose their control, often seem to have very dark eyes, black eyes. So this thing really sort of got me going, and I did all of this research and came up with the idea. And also there's the idea perhaps that they're aliens or half alien, half human, all of these different sort of contexts. But I decided actually they're a form of being that exists with us. There are other sorts of beings or energies, and they're parasitic. They feed off our fear. They feed off of our insecurities, and they want energy. And the way they get the energy is to scare the out of you. And so you feed them. And in the process, I realized that when I was a teen, I was lighting the other side of things up like a Christmas tree because I was so scared. So no wonder they were attracted to me. They were feeding on my fear energy. And that's why today I can write all this and read all these stories. And 99.99% of the time, I'm fine because I just switch off and don't give it any energy. That's one thing I've learned in magic. If you don't give something any energy, it can't bother you. But the black-eyed kids really bothered me, especially since there's been a couple of times when I've woken up at 2:00, convinced I heard on my door. Literally sat in bed shaking. It's the only thing that's really scared me. And I think what that sort of story outline, the reason why it's so scary is because you're alone, you're in your house, 2:00 in the morning, there's a knock on the door, you open it up and there's two small kids. And you think to yourself, well, why are two small kids on my doorstep at 2:00 in the morning? So your instinct is immediately to help. But you're feeling this deep-seated sense of fear and you don't know why. And then you look at the kids and they're dressed a bit oddly, maybe in formal clothing, like they've just been to a funeral or something like that. Maybe the electrics start flickering, the TV goes off, the lights go out, this kind of thing. And then they ask, let us in. Let us in, please. We need to use the telegraph or the telephone or some such device. And all this time your fear is building, and that's when you notice their entire eyes are black. And at that point, you slam the door, if you can, in their face, and you sit there for the rest of the night, shaking in your boots, scared out of your wits. And I think this story is really sinister and really very scary. But I think that my favorite book, and it sold quite well, it has very good reviews, is Ghosts of the Living. What happened there was my mother said to me on the phone, Gary, is it possible to see ghosts of living people? I said, why? She said, because I keep seeing my sister. I saw her in the kitchen when I went in the kitchen. She was there just momentarily. I saw her at my door. When I answered the door, there was nobody there. And a couple of other similar stories. So I started doing research into doppelgangers and all kind, astral travel and physical bilocation, all this kind of stuff. And I realized that the saints and all the saints in the church and also the sort of alchemists and the old spiritual masters are all credited with bilocation. It's not something that unusual if you dig into the literature. And I thought to myself, well, what if when you're mentally just sitting reading a book or something and you sort of just glaze out, but you're deep in thought about your sister and wondering, I wonder how she is. Is it possible to sort of bilocate momentarily, unconsciously, and appear to someone like my mother because you're concerned about her? And so that whole book is exploring this idea that we're all capable of bilocation and that we can do it accidentally when we're in a deep sort of meditational state and we're thinking about some place or someone and we can bilocate, and that it's something, a skill, a magical skill, I guess, that we could all learn potentially if we knew, how to actually do it. So these are the kind of things that I write about. I don't know if I scared you at all, but
no. Well. Funnily enough, you sent me the Black-Eyed Children book, and as I say, I read it, and it really quite disturbed me. And it disturbed me because of joining the dots. Because somebody else that I've been interviewed a couple of times, and I really am keen, on this show and expanding, is a guy called Paul Eno. Who's an ex-Catholic priest who's a paranormal researcher in North America. In fact, he's a cousin of Brian Eno, the musician.
Right.
Yeah, and his background is English or Devonian aristocracy, and this is one of the arguments he uses. And he's saying that time and time again he's been in situations whereby the entities are clearly, as he believes them to be, they are psychic vampires. And they draw off fear and they play on fear. And one of his cases was fascinating, of two children, again, in a cellar, two children that were asking for help in a cellar, and again, I'm reminded of this. And of course, a mutual friend of Sarah and myself is a lady called Kaz Coronel, who has been on this show and everything else. And Kaz is part of our inner circle and group. And Kaz is a direct descendant of the famous bilocating nun from Spain. You know, the nun that appeared. She was called Coronel, and this is literally. And Kaz, by the way, Kaz is also a direct descendant of Spinoza.
And that was a synchronicity we discovered because I put the bilocating nun story in my book, Ghosts of the Living.
That's right, it was, wasn't it? Because when we did the counter interview that we did, we discussed this very case. And this is when, you know, the way the kind of wheels within wheels start to move within our lives, and you go, this is just so extraordinary that we need to be writing it down purely and simply because so many extraordinary events are taking place in our mutual worlds at the moment, you know?
Well, these parasitic entities, I think, include the old hag. And if you read the regular materialistic science, then basically the old hag is what happens when you have sleep paralysis. I would argue that the sleep paralysis is what the parasitic entity does to you in order to take advantage of you, which is the other way around. And I was on a train. I had a trade show in Germany to go to a couple of 3 years ago, and I decided rather than fly, I'd take the overnight train and enjoy it. And I was in a sleeping compartment, and I thought, well, I'll just, you know, it was like 10 o'clock at night, so I thought I'd just go straight to bed because I got to get up at 5:30. And I pulled down the thing, and it was first class. I was really, you know, enjoying it. I switched out the light and I fell asleep, and I woke up and I could hear everything, the train moving, the conversation next door, people talking, and I could not move. And I was just aware that there was this thing, and I could see it come down from the luggage rack and sit on me. And I'm terrified. What is it going to do to me? And I realized that, you know, I hate to say it, but there was very definitely a sexual predatory feel to this thing. And all of a sudden, I just managed to jolt out of it. And the smoke thing went back up into the luggage rack. And I told it, you leave me alone. I went for a walk, went to the toilet, went for a walk, came back. I could still see the thing. And I kept telling it, you know, leave me alone. And I fell asleep again, and the same thing happened. So I sat in that carriage all night long. I never slept at all because that thing was still sat in the luggage rack. So if this was sleep paralysis, and my whole experience was because of sleep paralysis, why on earth was it still there when I was wide awake?
Yeah.
And this is common. This is a common thing, you know, that people experience the sleep paralysis, but they still experience the entity even when they've woken up from that sleep paralysis.
Well, it's funny you mention this. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read. Well, you have read my latest book, haven't you? I think The Hidden Universe. Yeah. And of course, this is the theme I'm taking. You know, it's the egregorial. It's the idea that these entities somehow, there's a feedback loop going on. They need us to draw themselves into this reality, but they are independent of ourselves, and they have their own intentions and their own malevolent reasons for doing whatever they do. And I think your point there to say that, you know, the sleep paralysis is a part and parcel of the overall effect, I think is an incredibly sensible comment and analysis of what's going on here. Because, you know, we're being too simplistic. There's something far stranger going on here, and we can bring in, you know, the idea of the collapse of the wave function, the way in which, you know, the conscious thought of subatomic particles, the way they can be, where they play around with each other. Clearly, there's something here, and there's this kind of sexual predatory feeling as well, you know, that why it would be that way, you know, what is it about it that there's the darkness that seems to happen, you know?
Another energy that you know can be used to sustain an entity is my feeling.
Yeah, I guess it's a life force, isn't it? Which is really the source of sexual energy, is the life force that flows through you.
I'm a scientist, and I'm always telling people, you know, if you read the newspapers or BBC, science is proven. And everything's hunky-dory, and we know exactly what we're doing. And, you know, this is just nonsense. If you actually read the scientific literature, there's no consensus on anything. And, you know, the whole point of objective science is not to have consensus, but to have debate and disagreement and arguments in order to drive a hypothesis to a conclusion. And I think that scientists and science have got themselves comfortable about we've got all this figured out. and they poo-poo the paranormal stuff and the kind of stuff you and I look at in terms of reality, etc. But then, the quantum physicists have opened up a whole can of worms, and then you start to say, "Ha, see, you don't actually know anything about reality. Nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're just kidding yourself. You're kidding yourself."
It's what I call. Sorry, yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the things that bilocating brings up, reminds me of, is I was watching the Netflix series Surviving Death last night. I watched loads of episodes, and there was a big bit of it that was dedicated to those end-of-life visitations. And it reminds me of that because they're very sort of frequently reported that when people are at the end of their lives, they're often in a sort of like in and out of consciousness type of state, and they will see their loved ones, and there'll be absolute crystal clear visions of their loved ones that feel completely real to them, that are inviting them and making them feel safe about dying.
Yeah, Peake and Darien experiences, aren't they, technically? Right, I'm very aware that we're about to come to the end. Gary, that was a simply extraordinary show. Absolutely extraordinary. I mean, again, as we say with most of our guests, there is so much material here. We have to have you back, and we have to spend, maybe Sarah, we can invite Gary to a future incom, where we can just continue the conversation for 2 or 3 hours. And I think, Gary, I'll discuss that with you to see if we can get that soon in the future, which would be really wonderful. Now, finally, just so everybody that's listening in and everybody will be watching this subsequently on my YouTube channel, can you let people know how they can contact you, how they can acquire your books, just the general information?
Yeah, sure. That. I mean, the books are all available on the Amazon and other websites. I have a website, GaryMVasey.com, and I actually blog now at GaryMVasey.net. I use the WordPress environment for the blogging because there's more interest there. If you're interested in the ghost stories, My Haunted Life 2, that's TOO, as in also, myhauntedlife2.com. And if you're interested in the magical world of G. Michael Vasey podcast, that's available on Spreaker and all the usual channels, Apple, etc., etc. So I'm very easy to find, very easy to get a hold of. And I go by Gary and G. Michael now. I give up.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And of course, check out the alternate interview where Gary interviewed me as well, because you can see that from the other side as well.
Interview, actually. And in fact, I think it's, if I look at the stats, I think it's number 1 in terms of the stats.
That's wonderful to hear. That is wonderful to hear. That is really great. I'm numero uno, which is really good. Right. Okay. Thanks again. Wonderful chat. We'll have you back on again. And again, thank you for everybody listening in live over there on Facebook. And this will be posted up on my YouTube site tomorrow when I'll record it and everything else and edit it. Gary, thank you very much. And as always, thank you, Sarah, for your assistance and your help in making all this happen. Thanks very much, guys. All the best.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.